we are. Okay, ready to go? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you can hear me, we've had a few hitches, both technical and non-technical, a lot associated with making sure the sunlight doesn't hit us fair in the face as we're sitting up here, which wouldn't be good for anyone. But good evening, how wonderful to be with you this evening as Design Canberra brings us weeks and weeks of wonderful ideas and stimulation and inspiration in an event that's been tonight live streamed and recorded. I'm Genevieve Jacobs, I'm the Group Editor for Region Media and the Right Act. It's always a huge pleasure to engage deeply with ideas around creativity and how we can make this beautiful city of ours a better place and leverage that deep history of good design that we share into a better future. I acknowledge that we meet on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, the traditional owners of this place. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I commit myself to ongoing acts of reconciliation. This is the first in the 2 Minutes to Midnight series, which takes ideas around design and embeds them in how we live, in the community's life, our well-being, our growth, our challenges. In this first edition, we'll meet the makers and discuss how the arts, culture and creativity are integral to the life of the city, to the life of our community, especially here in Canberra, which is a global city of design and recognised as such. One of the many hats I wear is to chair the Arts Minister's Creative Advisory Council, and one of the major ideas we've been exploring is working on the benefits that the arts brings to the community as a whole, the size of the arts, the shape of the arts, the way it permeates our entire community at every level, their economic, educational, mental health and tourism benefits, and just how many people engage in the arts and design and the creative industries. And tonight we'll look at just this, how arts and culture enhance the livability of a city, how they build a sense of place, and how that attracts people to live their lives here and to do their work in this place, benefiting from what this place specifically has to offer. And of course, the questions around financial viability in the arts, which is a deeply pertinent question, particularly given the ongoing pandemic. We'll ask what changes are needed to ensure that artists, designers and creatives can continue to live and work here and to do that to the greatest of their ability. And indeed, the structure for this event, forced on us by the pandemic, is an interesting one. We have a provocateur, Esther, joining us from Melbourne, several makers here in the venue from whom we'll hear, and a solid chunk of time for your questions too. Our socially distanced provocateur is Esther Anatolitis, who's an unrelenting advocate for Australian art and culture, former NAVA Executive Director, Deputy Chair of Contemporary Arts Precincts, who've recently opened the Collingwood Yards, and many other organisations. In early 2020, Esther became Honorary Associate Professor at RMIT's School of Art. She's one of Australia's most sought-after commentators on arts, culture and the creative industries. Kate Fielding, next to me, is a cultural strategist and program director for A New Approach. She helps organisations evolve and grow, especially those with an arts and cultural development focus. She's chaired and helmed multiple arts initiatives, and this I love as a woman with highly identifiable hair myself. She is writing a book about how people around the world are using hair and hairdressing as a tool for driving change. I reckon the Minister might approve. Jennifer Kamari Martinello, a contemporary urban-based Aboriginal glass artist, a proud Arunta woman and a true superstar of Australian art, is also with us. Her work is represented in multiple Australian art collections and international collections. She has a slew of major prizes, both here and overseas, including the 2013 Telstra National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art Award for her beautiful piece, Golden Brown Reed's Fish Trap, which I think many of you will probably know and love and recognise immediately. Jenny's one of the 100 inspirational local ACT women chosen to mark the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. We will hear from both Kate and Jenny shortly, but the shape and the texture of this event, if I can put it that way, is being helmed by Esther. And I would now like to hand over to her, if she can see us and hear us. Esther, are you with us?
I am indeed with us. Hello, everyone.
Over to you, Esther, to frame the debate. Go for it.
Oh, divine! It is so great to see you all, and just in the tradition of technical glitches, my driving force, my clicker for this event with its special code worked until just a moment ago, and I have just sent the IT guys a bit of a message saying that I've received an error message. I'm hoping they're going to send me a fix for that. But in the meantime, while we're doing that, I won't be able to drive the presentation that I can't see. While we're working out that technical error, here at the beginning of NAIDOC week, I am on the lands of the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm, Melbourne. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. It's an honour to get to speak alongside Jennifer, and I honour the Ngunnawal and Ngambri elders and all First Nations people here this evening. And as Genevieve said, I'm Esther Anatolitis, and at this extraordinary time of change, thank you to Craft ACT and Design Canberra for the invitation to be here. Now, let me just see if the technical error has fixed itself and we are now seeing my presentation. I'm hoping that the technical glitch will work such that I can be shown what you're seeing, because while I can now drive the presentation, I can't see it. I can only see me. Whereas previously I had a really great little picture-in-picture, and I've now got no way of seeing you nor what's on your screen. So I'm going to persevere and keep talking while we are trying to sort this out. Our theme tonight is 2 minutes to midnight. And with 2 minutes to go, we have sorted that technical hitch, and I can now see. So 2 minutes to midnight. Oh, cheers all round. I did hear that. Yay. 2 minutes to midnight. What does that mean? The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, who you may have heard of, they put together some time ago something called the Doomsday Clock. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists exists to equip the public policy makers and scientists with the information needed to reduce man-made threats to our existence, of which they, you know, what's the word? They don't delight. They insist in pointing out that there are many such threats. This clock is, this very striking design of this clock is by artist Martel Langsdorff. Her husband, Alexander Langsdorff, was one of the physicists who worked on the Manhattan Project. And 2 minutes to midnight indicates that we are quite close to something quite perilous. But in fact, what they describe there is that two massive threats confront us: nuclear war and climate change. And more recently, they are compounded by a third multiplier, a threat multiplier, which they call cyber-enabled information warfare, something that undercuts society's ability to respond. Now, what's worse is that earlier this year, on the 20th of January, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists put out a latest update. It's not 2 minutes to midnight. It's in fact only 100 seconds to midnight. It's the closest that we have been to that kind of destruction. And this is a map of, or a graphic rather, of where those threats, where those, so what we're seeing here in the images, this is since 1947, where the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists have set our threat level, and our current threat level is worse than it ever has been. And of course, that date, the 20th of January this year, was prior to the pandemic. So the world is facing the threats of atomic war, the threats of climate change, and now COVID-19. It is really, to put it mildly, a perilous time, and which is what makes it so important to be getting together for the questions that have been set for us this evening. Because the pandemic has caused the most devastating disruption to our cultural lives that most of us have ever known. It's disrupted the ways that we see each other, meet each other, the ways that we make and share, the ways that we express culture through our customs, through all the different ways that we know ourselves and know others. And of course, as has been well documented, the arts industry, the broader arts, cultural, creative industries have been among the first and the worst hit. On the most recent figures, it is the equal, or it's in the top 2 worst hit industries. This has hit artists really, really badly. The responses from various governments have not adequately responded, have not adequately either understood the scale of the problem, but also the impact and the benefit of making sure that those negative impacts are redressed. And we're still in a situation now with that we've had a parliamentary inquiry which is still going into COVID-19 and the government's response, and also one on the arts and cultural industries, which includes that COVID-19 response. But within that, within those difficulties of maintaining and sustaining a practice and being makers throughout this entire time, we've longed for one another, and we've also longed to use our hands to make things. We've been hearing all over the world what a resurgence, what a demand, what a yearning for craft there has been. And it's been quite fascinating. We have longed to use our hands. We've longed to show ourselves, to remind ourselves that we can make things, that making things is part of who we are. It's the expression of our culture. It strengthens so much in terms of, health and mental health and so on. But what we create and the way that we create it, the techniques that we draw upon, the tools, that sense of making is so core and so fundamental to who we are. So given those threats, how close we are to that midnight, given those damaging implications for artists and makers and for the industry, and that need to be makers, to connect with each other, what are the changes needed? This is the question that Arts ACT and Design Canberra have put to us this evening. What changes are needed to ensure that artists, designers and creatives can continue to live, work and make? And that's really important, each of those, to live, to work and to make. Again, that making is just so fundamental. Craft gives us the tools and the techniques to create our future. When we think about what it means to be a maker, to learn from makers, to spend time with makers, it's that strong sense of agency, that sense that you are making something, that you are contributing, that you are forming, that you are solving a problem, that you are contributing to that great tradition of objects, of challenges that you're responding to and contributing to that material life cycle. But also you're seeing your world as something that you actively create. It's an active citizenship. There are issues, there are matters in the world, and you have the power, the right, the duty, the sensibility to contribute and be an active contributor, to create our own culture rather than passively consuming it ready-made. And this was very much the environment in which I grew up. This was my father's workshop in Sydney quite some time ago. My father is a craftsman, a master craftsman in wood. And he raised me with this really powerful sense that if you had the right tools and the right techniques, the right materials, there was quite literally nothing you could not do. It really was just such an important and invigorating way to be raised. more recently, and something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is a project I was involved with for the State of Design Festival here in Victoria back in 2009, called Today I Make a Personal Commitment to the Future We Design Together. It was all about inviting artists, makers, thinkers, academics, policymakers, politicians to make that personal commitment. What personal commitment can you make that is in fact something that we all share? Because the future we design together, it's happening all the time, whether we're actively engaged in that or not. And so doesn't it make sense to be makers, to be very, very active in that? We speak in craft a great deal of the hand of the maker, to see it expressed in the object. And something that I know we're going to hear from Jenny is about, again, that relationship between that personal commitment, a commitment to practice, a commitment to the country that grounds us, the ethics that drive us. It is very much a time of reflecting on and really drawing on and being grounded by our personal values. For me, for a very long time, there's been three questions that have guided everything that I do, which is where to live, and how best to live. The questions of place and practice and politics, the ways in which we contribute, where we are and what place and country means to us, and then what we do, how we make, how we are engaged with the ideas, the objects, the works that create our future. So this evening, we're going to hear some ideas, some very big ideas about crafting the future. And as we do, it's going to be really important for all of us to think about those personal commitments. What will we make together? Because as the scientist told us earlier, there is absolutely no time to be lost when it comes to valuing what we make. It's not just in terms of ourselves, it's not just in terms of practice as makers and supporting makers, and the role of objects in our lives which draw back on and reflect and evolve our culture. But valuing what we make is exceptionally important. Design is the biggest contributor to that gross value added of Australia's creative industries. Of the 12 domains that the ABS identifies, almost half of the gross value added to the Australian economy comes from design. So we need to value design education. I've been in some very frustrating, very difficult conversations today about studio-based higher education, and unfortunately its decline. I'm hearing some really concerning things out of Griffith University, also out of my own institution, RMIT, and a range of others. Because to invest, we need to value. To value, we need to advocate, to make it a part of our everyday, make it better, to make it work. People who see themselves as makers, as directly engaged in the culture that we all create, aren't apathetic, but are active and responsible. They're the most powerful citizens of all. So as we listen to Kate and to Jenny this evening, thinking about what we make, making what we need, making a call to a politician. Great that the minister's here this evening. Making the first move. What are we going to make? What commitments are we going to make to that practice? Because if that making practice as well as advocacy is an ongoing practice. Because if we zoom out again, the atomic scientists, their warning is very clear. From the 20th of January statement of this year, they say the international security situation is dire, closer to apocalypse than ever. Just to end on a downer, civilization ending nuclear war, whether started by design, blunder, or simple miscommunication, they say, is a genuine possibility. And they exhort us. They say, we believe that mass civic engagement will be necessary to compel change, the change that the world needs. Citizens around the world have the power, they say, they can demand through public protest, through the ballot box, but also in creative ways that their leaders take immediate steps. It is now 100 seconds to midnight, they say. Now is the time to unite and to act. Let's see if we can make that clock go backwards, away from this 100 seconds, back to here we are, I think it's 17 minutes, which is a couple of decades ago, the furthest it's ever been. But together, let's come up with those great ideas tonight. Let's commit to shared actions together. Let's create our future. Let's do this. Thank you very much.
Esther, thank you so much. I love the idea that with the right tools, we can do anything. And I think despite the despair of being just 100 seconds from midnight, perhaps there's two things we might take hope from. One is the rain, and that the other is that things maybe look a little bit more hopeful after Sunday morning. Perhaps you might all feel that way. Kate Fielding, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I am going to start by talking about some unusual tools, which you actually referenced there in the introduction. So hello, I'm Kate Fielding. I'm a number of things, but one of them is a social change hairdresser. And I'm going to start from that fairly unusual place today to talk a little bit about the theme of care. So a very long time ago it feels now, I moved out to the desert in Western Australia and was running a community cultural development program, and I had, you know, these glamorous ideas of what we might do. But of course, because it's, you know, good cultural development practice, I talked with my community and my team about what they wanted to do. And through a whole heap of discussions, it was identified that hairdressing was actually the thing that people wanted to do. Now, I must admit, I grew up in regional Victoria, and I can remember as, you know, about an 8-year-old going, I don't want to be a hairdresser when I grow up. Fast forward a couple of decades and suddenly I find myself holding a pair of scissors. I'm left-handed, there was only right-handed scissors, trying to make these tools work. And I learnt so much from that experience. Also, you know, how to use scissors with my right hand, and also the fact that it is worth getting left-handed scissors. But also the importance of caring for self, the importance of caring for each other, the importance of caring for community, the importance of caring for place, and the importance for caring for values, and the need to constantly engage with and renew those values. And certainly the events that we've been seeing that you refer to there on the Sunday morning, there are big values that underpin our society that are absolutely essential to continually renew, to refresh, to engage with. We need to care for those things. Now, what I learnt from that, aside from all that caring, was the ability of whatever tools you have to use those in a creative way, in a way that engages people in cultural activities that are meaningful for them, in their place, in their community. It's an incredibly powerful technique. And what I'm going to talk about now is a new approach, which is the program that I left beautiful Western Australia for, to come here to beautiful Canberra. And I've got to say, what an amazing place Canberra is. Seriously, I'm blown away by how beautiful this place is. I've been here for a couple of years and I still am blown away every weekend when I get to go out into the bush and see how wonderful this location is. I moved across here to run a new approach, which is a national think tank focused on championing effective investment and return in arts and culture. It's quite the mouthful. So what we do is to really take a step back. I was asked when I started this role to take a step back at a lot of the claims that are made about the impact of arts, culture and creativity, to look at the data, to understand what it is telling us, and to have an objective eye. Now, there's a whole range of work that we've released that fulfills that mandate, and I can say with confidence that arts, culture and creativity have an enormous impact across a whole range of aspects of our lives, and you've referred to some of them there. But what I'm going to do today, because the theme is care, is talk about the piece of work that I really care about, if you'll indulge me. And that's a piece of work that we did early this year. Do you remember that 2 weeks between the bushfires and the hailstorm and COVID-19? That was 2 weeks. And we really luckily, so when I say we, I'm talking about a new approach. We're backed by 3 philanthropic organisations, and we're based here in Canberra in the Australian Academy of Humanities. And that being backed by 3 philanthropic organisations gives us a particular freedom to ask difficult questions. The difficult question that we asked was, does Middle Australia care about arts, culture and creativity? And in that beautiful little magic pocket of time, we did focus groups with middle-aged, middle-income swing voters in marginal federal electorates in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland. Sorry ACT, sorry WA, and the other states and territories as well. What we found by talking to middle-aged, middle-income swing voters in federal marginal electorates is they are really clear about the role that arts, culture and creativity plays in their lives. And I want to be really, really clear about this. We, the company that we commissioned to do this work, they're a research company that does this type of work across Australia all the time. When I briefed them, I said, I need you to tell me the bad news. I want you to go in there neutral. If there's good news, I want to hear it, but if there's bad news, I want to hear it. I don't want you to lead these groups. I don't want you to go in and come back and tell me, oh, they care about it because this reason. I want you to find out if they do care about it, if it does have any relevance. And if it does, great, tell me about that. But if there's groups of people say, no, it doesn't, follow that, ask why, find out, give me those responses. This is not a cherry-picked piece of work, is what I'm trying to say there, which of course makes me think of cherries and the fact that they're coming into season soon. How great. So, the reasons that Middle Australians care about arts, culture and creativity are: 1, it's essential to the Australian way of life. In fact, being human. This was a table-thumping group of forklift drivers from the outer suburbs going, if we don't have arts and culture, if we don't have creativity in our lives, we may as well live on Mars. We wouldn't be human. And the value was expressed in 2 really distinct themes. And I've got my list here to make sure I get them exactly right. So 1, there was a kind of group who said that creativity, imagination and inspiration were the things that were absolutely key for them about arts, culture and creativity. The second theme was around participation, belonging, community. And certainly this year we've seen such strong expressions of that during the lockdown, during the pandemic, of people really wanting to find ways to connect through arts and culture and have that sense of belonging. I think, of course, of those scenes from Anzac Day where people were out on the streets playing music together, socially distanced. There's been a whole range of different ways that we've found to use arts and culture to have that sense of belonging when we can't be close to each other. Now, that work has been really quite extraordinary in its impact. It's been extraordinary in the conversations that it's opened up. It's been extraordinary in the way that it's shaped our next set of questions and our next set of understandings of what is needed. And from that work, through the process of that work, we came across a really interesting thing, the Sports 2030 plan. Australia has a sports plan called Sports 2030, which came into place in 2016 or 2018, I can't remember, sorry, 2018. And what's so fascinating about that plan is it's not a, it's a plan that looks at the role of sport in all of our lives, as participants, as community members, as elite sports people, as fans, and also the business of sport, the sports people, the making, that it's a large commercial activity in Australia as well. And when our team found this, they went, what a fantastic example of what could be really useful for Australia in getting a richer cultural life accessible to more people across the country. So we've been calling for a national arts, culture and creativity plan, and certainly the parliamentary inquiry into creative and cultural industries and institutions, which Esther referred to. That's one of the main recommendations that we've made to that. We think that there's a real opportunity to really, often when we talk about arts and culture, we either talk about participation or we talk about production. So we talk about supply or demand. We think that the Sports 2030 model is really excellent in the way that it doesn't go, or the industry over there and there's an audience over there and they're not connected. It talks in a really connected way about the participation level, the community level, the elite level, the commercial level as one, and I hesitate to use this word, but one ecosystem. I think that's a really interesting and important model for us. Now I'm going to hand over and we will come back for questions. Please ask me a question about hairdressing. I know you've got one.
Please thank Kate, that was terrific.
Thanks.
And I'm actually really inspired. I was thinking right throughout this, right, got to grab Kate afterwards. Lots of questions to ask her, things I need to harvest from you. But now, Jenny, to you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk about the fundamental basic ground of caring. But I'm going to do it through my particular Aranda spyglass, if you like, and I'll tie it up at the very end with a diagram that I hope the penny will drop for everybody on the 5 principles that govern traditional Aboriginal continuity of all things, of life. You know, physicality, our spirituality, the ground for which we make and from which we make. I've given 2 quotes here. So there's the focus quote that belongs to contemporary, urban, Eurocentrically defined design. What do I do as a designer living in this city, as an Aboriginal artist, but a participant in the broader ground of creativity? And I'm telling you that my work is inspired by woven traditional objects, eel traps, fish traps, and I am paying tribute to the oldest living weaving tradition in the world. And at the same time, I am appropriating for my purpose a tradition that comes from Venice, that's 600 years old, of working with hot blown glass, canes, glass canes and so forth. And what I am doing is bringing them together within what I think is the aesthetics of both. So one of the things in that focus is we build these silos of division, and it's design or it's art or it's craft or it's that or it's something else. Those are fictional and illusory. They belong together. We are part of this together. The second statement is really the ground of what it's really all about and what should be all about for all of us as makers, and especially in a COVID year, in a post-COVID time. It embodies the continuity of heritage, place, people, community, and the collective socio-cultural identity that not just my Aboriginal people share, but that we all share in the continuing dreaming of this nation. It marks the passage of knowledge between generations. So intergenerational transmission is critical. We can't forget the past, but that intergenerational capacity means I don't just inherit my grandmother's laws, I inherit my grandchildren's laws. And that's a very important thing. So as Kamara Skin in the social order of things, my son's daughters are Peltera Skin, and my grandmother was Peltera Skin. They're my grandmothers, not just my granddaughters. My daughter's children are Ampechana Skin, which was my great-great-grandmother's skin. So those granddaughters in this generation or iteration of generations are also my great-grandmothers. And so our duties and responsibilities flow through those structures and are incredibly important. But my work also embodies the iteration of trade routes and ceremonies, past and present, and celebrates the critical role our environment plays in our physical, our psychological, and our spiritual survival. This is my grandmother's country. This is an aerial photograph that I took flying over my grandmother's country in Central Australia. That is the path of the Finke River, and this particular area is called Stone Country. And somewhere in Stone Country is a place called Charlotte Waters, where my grandmother, our grandmother, was born. This is the very end of the Finke when it flows, when in past millennia, where it flowed into Lake Eyre. It is the Larapinta in our language. It's the oldest river on earth. Geologists tell us it's flowed in these pathways for 500,000 million years. This earth isn't going anyplace. We might, but it will survive us. So anything we do post-COVID, anything we do helping this planet along, we have to remember its patterns are there. It is our responsibility to discover its patterns, to go back to those, to become the voice for those patterns and not fight against them. So a couple of contemporary kiln-formed pieces that were inspired by those aerial photographs. The one on the right is actually firestorm country, so it's multiple layers that are trying to embody not just the destruction of ash after fires and so forth, but underneath the red beating heart of the land itself, which isn't going anyplace. Inheriting my grandmother's gardens. This is a much older work. It's a textile piece. It embodies screen printing and hand painting. But it is about seeds and germination. It's about the seed that's in the palm of the hand of the ancestor, and women's nourishment and creation. And this is the Inheriting My Grandchildren's Gardens, which is the same imagery, but it has the storylines. In fact, it's a prose poetry story that is about my eldest granddaughter, who's the heir to the matriarchy, as we say. And this embodies hers and my grandchildren's journeys over the same land. Heritage is so critical. The British Museum we saw a few years ago at the National Museum, a fish basket. Something for the sustenance of human beings, but gathered from the environment in a way that did not damage the environment. How do I pay tribute? By creating that in glass and saying, this cannot exist without what has gone before. The value of this must be measured in what has been created before. We don't have a language to talk about this if we don't talk in the language of what has gone before. That is what is the important thing about caring. That is an internal view of another blown glass fish basket, which is attempting to recreate the fibres drawn from the land itself. So, and again, from the British Museum collection, on the left, one of the rainforest shields with its markings, a contemporary attempt of mine to recreate shields, but in this case, with other symbolisms and journey lines in it. The same with this as well. So it is the integrity of my work is cannot exist without the integrity of what has gone before. An eel trap by Narrandjeri artist Stephen Kulmatri. Her woven works are extraordinary. A hot blown glass eel trap to pay tribute to that. And another one. These are now scattered all over the place. I don't even know where they live now. The idea of the fish trap, again, it created from the simplest traditionally of objects, you know, lawyer cane and brushes, without damaging the environment. The fish trap from Yirrkala was on display in the Telstra Award a couple of years ago. It's a gorgeous thing, it's just so alive. And when you see these things that have been made and being used, they have a spirit to them. They're alive. And it's when you see that, it's that life, that spirit, that you understand how something that comes from the earth embodies the life of the earth itself. And on the right, my inadequate attempt to do this. A heritage bicornual basket made from lawyer cane from Queensland. It wasn't registered where it was collected from. Bicornual baskets, there are two kinds. There were the Queensland ones that were often used for food and medicine plants. In South Australia, warriors carried very large ones that hung from the shoulder to the knee, and they accommodated the large curved throwing weapons for various prey. So they were men's and women's. So we can't make distinctions between genders and things. And one of the awards I made for the First Nations Art Awards for the Australia Council earlier this year, which is based on the loop weave by Cornwall. Again, the dilly bags are amazing. The coil weaves are incredible. They're incredible challenges to creating glass. But again, there is no way I could conceive of even beginning if it wasn't for those that belong to our heritage and have been done. And my aunties wove. And I didn't really understand as a child how critically important that was to me as who I am in my identity. Again, a flat-shaped dilly bag with an attempt to recreate the fibres and the interlacing of fibres in a particular weave. And this is ultimately completely addictive as an arts practice, I have to tell you. After Cyclone Yazi went through Mission Beach, I was up there taking photographs, and the way the fibres were stripped from the palms, revealing these incredible weaves that are naturally occurring weaves, and then to be able to try and recreate them in hot blown glass. These are what it's really about, I think, and these are called voice cores of the first speaking. So the concept is, if we sank shafts down to the bedrock to try and draw out the history of place and various places, instead of the geology, if we could draw up the sounds of the first voices, what would they look like? How would they sound? So one of the things in these is there's ovals and there's circles and there's, you know, for vowels, there's long forms for consonants, but each one belongs to a different place. And so each one I've used the colours of those places. So there's Mutawinji, which is in the north of New South Wales. There's the Tarkine. In Tasmania, there's the Red Gibbet Desert where my father was born, near Oodnadatta. Places that, and there's one there that has kelp forms in it for Tasmania. So I think these things are about making, and they are, as this says, a looking glass, like postcards from the past. And just think about what would it be like for you as an artist or a maker to receive a postcard from your great-great-grandmother who maybe made lace? Or your great-great-grandfather who might have made chairs and was a carpenter? The other thing is the environment, the flora. These in particular are hakea, and one of the challenges is how will I do justice to these in glass? And so these are bicornual baskets, but they're also based on creating morini to try and recreate those fine filaments and seeds and elements of hakea. And there are others with other native plants as well. So all of these, and the message sticks which give safe passage, and many other meanings besides, but we also have birds who are messengers. And the birds give us particular insight into who we are. They're also totems, along with other animals, and they have an intimate relationship to us. So this is a magpie message stick, a rainbow lorikeet message stick. And these are the other stories, the other voices that I've been uncovering, which these are the two Gallipoli poles. They are kiln-formed glass. The one on the right holds the names of the Aboriginal men who fell at Gallipoli. On the left, the traditional warriors' shield is on there, and also names of other Aboriginal men who fought in the First World War and at Gallipoli. And in the centre is something that I did quite a long time ago when we were thinking about the referendum and what it meant to Aboriginal people, because when the referendum, after the referendum, we were allowed to vote and do things like that, recognised as Australian citizens. So actually my first 18 years I wasn't an Australian citizen, but I did belong to this land, and this land owned me. So I think, when we're looking at caring, look at everything we have received, from the most basic elements of the world we live in, and think about them. Have we heard it? Have we heard those voices completely? Have they been the voices we have loved? I don't know about people, but one of the things about people that have passed that stays with me is their voices. I can still remember my auntie's voices and how distinct they were, and my dad's voice and my mum's voice, and those are that central part. They're the voices that taught us to care in the first place when we were growing up. And then the other voices from our socio-cultural history, well, these are made from works rescued from landfill. They pay tribute to all the Aboriginal girls who were taken and trained as domestics. And they're made from, the bodies are made from ironing board frames. There's tennis rackets and pegs and buttons and fabric samples. So they manifest from what was their servitude, but they became the leaders of our communities. And this, because my heritage also includes Anglo-Celtic and Chinese. And I found this, someone kept saying, but what about, your other heritage? How do you embody that? So I found this Celtic harp at a garage sale. And then recreated the dark emu and the Milky Way on one side and the Chinese dragon on the other. And so it becomes that statement. But this is what it's about. And this is where all of that comes from. The 5 principles that sustain for Aboriginal people life and being and possibility. There's land, place and country. So if you take that circle up there under number 1, but it connects to Jokapa, which is dreaming, which is law, which embodies every kind of law about how to treat each other and how to look after the land and how to be. 3, family, the interconnections through generations and through our kinship systems, our extended families, through our skin systems. Spirit, the spiritual dimension. So this is very much like our languages are multidimensional. I could talk to someone in language and we might talk about community, but at the same time I'm talking on a spiritual level to someone who can understand, and then we have sign and other dimensions as well. So life is multidimensional. And the most important thing, taking care, which connects everything in the centre. You take care of land, you take care of where you come from, what is sacred. You take care of the spiritual dimensions of each other and the psychological dimensions of each other. Take care of family. And in doing so, you take care of everything. So, all yours.
Goodness, Jenny, that's fantastic. Jenny, that was just so marvellous and so profound.
Thank you.
And I think just magical to see how you have drawn together the deep roots of your being, who you are, as you say there, your Jokapa, your sense of place, the bonds of family and the interconnectedness of your world. Yeah. And it's a brilliant evocation of the power of your art too. Kate, we've heard from you how much art matters deeply to people, perhaps surprisingly so and hearteningly so. But Esther, back to you. We've talked at the very beginning about how the ideas of making are deeply significant, powerful for all of us, but also we're at a place that feels like a place of peril. I want to turn over to you now to say where you think this conversation has led. What's opening up here?
Oh, it has been, first of all, just such a gift to listen, particularly to listen to Jenny describing that connection between values and practice. And of course, Kate led us into that conversation about the connection between values and practice. That practice of social change hairdressing is about having often some of the most intimate kinds of conversations, and I think it is just such an intriguing and readily accessible way for us to understand the complexity of culture, you know, what it means to us. But listening to Jenny, and I was taking some notes because I was just so intrigued, particularly where you said, Jenny, that a particular work, a reflection cannot exist without that which has gone before, that we don't have a language to talk about this if we don't talk in the language of what has come before. And in a sense, in speaking about the atomic scientist and referring back to our theme about the 2 minutes or the 100 seconds to midnight, I took us to literally a doomsday scenario of the doomsday clock. And Jenny reminded us that the earth isn't going anyplace. It's our responsibility to discover its patterns, to be the voice of those patterns and not fight against them. And so I think the real challenge for us now in question time is to think about, as Jenny has said, have we heard those voices completely? What are the patterns and the values that ground us? And then what are the commitments that we are going to make to ourselves and perhaps publicly today to sustain and to keep developing the range of practices that create our future.
Okay, let's turn that over to the questions, which I know, because I know lots of people in this audience, I know you will have questions, and go for it. Yes, Kate.
I know, I've got the mic.
Yes, I know you've got the mic, but give it to whoever you're giving it to. Put your hand up if you'd like the mic from Kate. I've got a couple of questions that we can start off with. if you're still cogitating and thinking that one through. And perhaps, Kate Fielding, I'll go to you. I'm so conscious that the arts and creative industries are like submarines. They're huge, but mostly we only see the tip, the conning tower, I think they call it. And we've been talking about how deeply the values surrounding arts and creativity matter to us. You've articulated that that's something that's not only isolated to the arts community itself, but to the community at large. But it seems to me that maybe we've failed to build a persuasive case about how powerful and significant the arts really are. They're like something that bubbles along and that we'd really regret if we lost them. But I don't hear a lot of people talking up there on the hill or anywhere else about how significant that is to all of our lives, our humanity. What do you think's gone wrong?
Look, I think it's really interesting. Obviously, that's a common thing that people say and think about. And I guess I'm yet to meet a politician who doesn't think that arts and culture is important. I actually have yet to meet one who doesn't think that it's an essential part of what is part of being Australian. I think that it's important to recognise that often arts, culture and creativity is valued by our leaders. We may not be happy about some of the action around that, but I think separating out the action from the value is actually quite important. While of course values and practice, values find their expression in practice, I think it is also really important to notice when arts and culture is valued, when it is recognised as a really essential part of Australian life. And there's a wide range of ways in which we can see that reflected in our public life, from our incredible cultural institutions here through to, and I always love this example, the Mullet Festival in outback New South Wales, in the incredible turning up of people to events and activities. Australia actually has one of the highest participation rates for arts and culture in the world. We actually out-attend France, which I'm always amazed by. Every time I say that, I go back and double check the numbers. I'm like, we actually do. So I think perhaps what has gone wrong is a self-perception of Australia as a country that doesn't experience and love and celebrate arts and culture. We actually do in our actions.
Yeah, and Esther, I might actually turn that to you, because I think what Kate's saying is very interesting. It's as if there's this unspoken thing that we all know, but no one wants to particularly put their head up above the parapet and say, actually, Australia's an art-loving country and a country where the arts really matter deeply. Kate?
I'm actually going to jump in there and say there's a really important nuance here. Arts and culture. So in the work that we did with Middle Australia, if you just talk about arts, a whole heap of people are not interested. Arts has a very narrow definition. When you talk about arts and culture, it opens up that conversation to a much broader and more inclusive set of relevance. And pleasingly, for this room, design is part of that. So people, when we talked about what arts and culture is, people were going, well, it's the design of cars, and it's the way that you get a beautiful, the beautiful line in a building. That sense of design being part of arts and culture was really inbuilt. But if we talked about arts, that's not to do with me.
Point taken. Esther, back to you. What in your observation then does it take to break out of that silo, to make people acknowledge what maybe they know deep inside them, that these things really do matter profoundly? Is there a way to do that?
It is strange, that disconnection. And certainly this year, and that slide I showed earlier with a lot of those headlines around arts and culture in the news this year, we've had in this past year the greatest prominence of arts and cultural and creative industry issues in the in the media than we have seen for a very, very long time. We've had every political analysis show, every serious political journalist in Australia has put those questions not simply to the Arts Minister, but to the Treasurer, the Prime Minister, to a range of other ministers. The engagement that we have at the moment is really quite extraordinary at local, regional, state and national levels. And so we're at a a better place than ever before when it comes to having politicians understand the value to the broader economy, but also the value to all of us. And I guess, on that point, and Kate is right that, you won't meet a politician who tells you that they don't value arts and culture. And even the ones who have unfortunately at times used particular attacks on artists for their own political gain, as we saw with George Christensen and Abdullah around a year ago. Even that is an acknowledgement on George Christensen's part on the great value and the power and the impact of the work of art and our response to that. So it's about finding across the political spectrum the language, the ins that resonate with policy making in different ways. I think the work of A New Approach is exceptionally valuable in terms of bringing together the statistics, the key threads and arguments, and arts and culture plan alongside Sports 2030 would be absolutely brilliant. But I think also the answer to that also draws on what Jenny was saying in terms of how we articulate our values. If we all become more confident advocates and speak to people who make decisions and connect with people who speak to people who make decisions, who are those political decision makers in our lives, if this conversation becomes a part of the Australian commonplace, then that value will be reflected in our decision making. It won't be something where, I go and meet politicians and they say, yes, this is fantastic, but you're the first person to come to my office and talk about this. Why aren't I hearing about this in my electorate? Why aren't artists coming to meet with me? So that we need to change and really become active, connected, and civically engaged.
And look, I'll turn again to the room for a question, but I just wanted to take to you, Jenny, this strange idea that we're developing, that lots of us perhaps really do care quite a lot about the arts, but we're not that aware or able or keen to acknowledge and to value it. And you spoke so beautifully about values. For many artists, there are really high expectations of cultural engagement, but also often rampant financial exploitation. So many expectations that artists will deliver their work for the good of the community, because we all want it, we all need it, but that it will just be done without remuneration, without necessarily acknowledgement of what it takes to create that art. I wonder what your take is on why people are so often willing to devalue an artist's economic activity.
I think because there's this separation between how people define the arts, really. There is still a perception out there that it's a bit of a luxury. Where the big thing for me is that, traditionally we don't have a separate word for art or design. It is all land, it's all jorkapa, it's all spirit, it's all taking care. It's embedded in everything. It's a manifestation of all of those, and it is part of the custodianship of all of those as an activity, as a way of being, and as a way of thinking. And as soon as you say, we're going to name something art, then there's a whole academic exercise that happens in the Western world about how do we define that. And if we define that, where are we going to put it? It's like, can we put it on a shelf? What box are we going to put it into? What are we going to connect it to? And I think those are all the wrong questions, because it is manifestly for every civilization in the world, every country in the world, is that our arts and activities and products which define the cultural identity of that nation and that place. It's essential to that, in the same way that these activities are for Aboriginal people. And we have to get back to people understanding, who are you in this world you live in, because you are also defined by these. You know, so who are you? You know, how do you want to be valued as a person in relation to these things? And you have to put the personal back into it.
But I think the community has to then bring that value too. And as you were speaking, I was recalling a really shocking conversation I had at the beginning of the pandemic with a group of people who are involved in lots of different areas of advocacy in the ACT. And one of them said to me, "What are the artists doing about COVID? What are they doing?" I said, "Well, actually, they've all lost their jobs and they're all unemployed. But the frontline response was to say, what are the artists doing about this?" And I thought, well, you've got to value the arts and culture as a community to understand how that equation works.
But also, you know, the answer to that is, well, did you turn on your TV? Did you see the free concerts the other night? Have you looked at TikTok even, you know? It's, what they're doing is actually contributing to the healing of people who are feeling lost, isolated, with mental illness. We're actually healing the nation.
And so important, that role. Let's go to some questions from the floor. I can see Kate waving to me from the back. Yeah, Stephen.
Hello, yes. I guess my question is around, on the one hand, I'm really conscious that the arts are seen valued by everyone, but they do tend to pick up like bits and pieces, right? You know, even this response to the COVID thing from the government is some more grants and stuff like that. How do you see the whole funded arts area relating to when you get to the big bucks, you know, where money doesn't talk, it swears, with Australian content and the whole issue of, you know, Australian content in the mass media and things like that? How do you see that related?
So if you just sort of clarify that, do you mean what's the role of government versus philanthropic funding?
No, I just think, how do, look, we experience a whole pile of arts activity, right? Like lots of artists producing stuff. It's funded by grants. But also at the other end of it, at the really big mass media thing where Australian content is either regulated or not regulated or let loose, how do you see the links between individual artists working and those kind of high-level forces that determine how much Australian content there is out there in the media?
Okay, Kate.
This is a really good question, and I'm someone who likes to understand how things work. Preferably, I'd like a diagram that shows me. And one of the pieces of work we've just released is looking at the economic contribution of cultural and creative industries, the cultural and creative economy. And in that piece of work, I sat down with my research manager and I said, okay, these are all the questions that I don't have a good answer to. And by the end of the year, by the end of this 12 months, I'd really like to be able to answer these questions. And one of them was, how does it work? What's the relationship between an individual creator and that mass creativity? And one of the beautiful things in that piece of work is a diagram that really steps out how a creative practice, how creative activity really drives broadly a whole range of cultural and creative activity in both within those creative industries, but also in other industries as well. It's not, you know, it's not as easy as ABC. It's, we need this cultural conversation, we need this innovation and creativity that drives those cultural stories, that cultural expression. But it's part, and again, I don't like using this word, but it's part of the same ecosystem. The best example internationally on how to trace that is through case studies. So looking at how individuals move between the subsidised and commercial art and cultural industries and take those skills in and out of different environments. But it's one of the trickiest questions to answer.
Thank you for asking it, for landing such a tricky question. Sorry, we'll go there. Yeah, Diana, go ahead. And then
Genevieve, could I also pop in on that one?
Yes, go ahead, Esther. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a great question. And at the beginning of the pandemic, the Minister for the Arts, who's also, of course, the Communications Minister, announced the suspension, the temporary suspension of Australian content quotas on free-to-air subscription and commercial television, which came in response to some consultation from and with those TV platforms and providers. But it caused great alarm for Australian screen producers, for the people, like organisations like the Guild of Screen Composers, like APRA AMCOS, in terms of music, various filmmakers, documentary makers, and also children's, because what was suspended were the Australian quotas for documentary, children's programming, and also local drama. When the suspension was announced, all the various Australian content makers got in touch with the minister and said, look, this will be the impact on our production and sales prospects for years to come if you continue to suspend those quotas. And unfortunately, the suspension was made sort of, I don't know if it's permanent, but it has been extended for several years. So it's really important that makers of screen content, music, documentary, children's programming, etc., and also people who love Australian content, because I mentioned earlier how much we were drawn to craft during this time, but we were also drawn, as Jenny was just saying, to TikTok and to subscription TV and so on, where we don't see enough Australian content. It's really important, those of us who are makers and also watchers of Australian content, to get in touch with the minister and the regulators to say, look, actually, I'm really concerned about this. If that pipeline is not there for Australian screen producers to sell their work here, then we're not going to see it. And we are going to consume disproportionately non-Australian work. So again, thank you for your question.
What a horrendous possible consequence of the pandemic. Diana, go ahead.
Firstly, thank you for all your work, and Esther, especially you, because of all those templates you donated to the arts sector, which I have saved in a folder. You don't know how handy those sort of things are, but and all the writing and the advocacy you've been doing this year. In the performing arts in particular, the impact has been absolutely dire, and really we're not going to be out of the woods for, I would say, 2 years minimum. And what that exposed was a huge lack of understanding in what that ecosystem is, massive lack of understanding. And I've been to so many of these, the value of the arts forums over the years, and all year I've been very active on Twitter and Facebook and reading so many comments criticising artists for whinging about their circumstances, blaming them for, whatever. So there is, despite what you say, Kate, I think there is still a real problem with the perception of, as you say, arts in particular and artists. And we should be able to, if we're good enough, we should be able to make a living. We shouldn't need funding. So the big question for me is, most people, yes, they'll agree that arts and culture is important and put entertainment into that mix as well, literature and all the rest of it. However, I think the big issue is, should arts be funded for a lot of Australians? And that brings us to a whole other set of questions about taxation and government funding of all sorts of things. Can you speak a little bit more in detail about that? Because for me, that is where people start to get really antsy about the arts. They think we're getting paid to do our hobby. They don't understand how subsidies actually make the arts more accessible. And why are we getting this wrong? Why can't we communicate this better after all these years? Can you help?
Sure. So I think that the really key phrase there is public value, and you are absolutely right. There is huge amounts of interest and support for arts and culture and belief in its relevance and impact. But The tricky question is, what is the public value? Because you're talking about public money, funding, government funding. It needs to deliver public value. And so one of the key pieces that we did was look at the evidence, the international evidence for the impact of arts, culture and creativity across 7 areas, one of which was culture, so a kind of intrinsic value one, but the others were around the things like the social the social and place well-being and health, education outcomes, the way that it impacts on innovation, which are concepts that generally most policymakers have a developed understanding of the public value of those things. So I think that's where we're going wrong. The debate around intrinsic versus instrumental is, I think, one of the most unhelpful debates that has dominated the conversation in Australia. It is, I think, counter to some of the long practice of an integrated cultural and creative heritage in Australia over a very long time. The separation of those things, I think, is one of the barriers that we need to overcome, so we can talk in a connected way about the public value of arts and culture, the way that it is important to us in a lot of different ways that mean different things to different people.
Jenny, how do you respond as an artist, as a maker yourself, to this idea about funding and the intrinsic value of the arts?
I guess probably give you a brief picture of mapping out how I got to where I am. And, you know, as an artist and, you know, sort of in 2003 when we had our Indigenous textile artists group and a group of us doing various things, different art forms, having exhibitions in galleries and not paying the electricity bill in order to buy the paints or the whatever we needed to do, to a point where we actually had to make some really firm decisions about if we're going to be practicing artists, we have to do this better. So there was then the discussion about developing small items for sale at Art and Craft which would generate the money to pay for materials for gallery type exhibitions. And then somewhere along the way we got some lovely help from Arts ACT to branch into the Glassworks, which was an excellent expansion. And I think for what I've seen, if you can project an expansion of your artistic practice in some way, it doesn't have to be into a different medium, but it has, in ways that has seemed to have a public art value that's not just Indigenous, but a more broad one, then you're going to attract more funding. Because we have actually set the stage now around things like experimentation and innovation, which brings us to the point where we have sustained artistic practice of extremely amazing standards, excellent standards, in this country by people who have achieved a pinnacle. And we should just pay them a wage to get on and do it, because they are maintaining the cultural identity of this nation. And, you know, if governments won't do it, okay, where are the corporates? How many artists do our big corporations have on their payroll who they pay to support an artist to continue the practice of maintaining and advancing the cultural and artistic heritage of the nation?
Okay, that's a powerful perspective. I think we had one question here. And we might turn after this back to Esther for your provocation. Esther, go ahead, sorry, with the question.
Thanks. Firstly, interesting how much identity and place has turned up in tonight's talk. And as someone very much interested in that, in kind of that evolution in Canberra, Wondering if we could just get some practical tips around the process for extracting, or at least understanding, place identity a little bit more, and then how that can be accelerated or evolved further. So in the context of Canberra being quite a young city, but also old enough that it does have pockets of a unique identity, and also as the head of the country, or the capital of the country, it also has some unique aspects happening within it in terms of place identity. So just wondering whether there are any practical tips to both understand and then also accelerate the place identity of a city.
Okay, that's a really fascinating question, and I would just add to that as you say it, that there's the European city identity, but under that there's the Molonglo River running through the veins here, there's the shape of the limestone plains, there's the folds of the hills around us, which are absolutely fundamental to our identity as a city. But Jenny, I wanted you to respond to that first.
Listen to the voice of the place. And that voice might be total cacophony of, cars, and it might involve, the smell of carbon dioxide down Northbourne or whatever. But listen to it, take it in, and feel it. What is this saying to me? How do I respond to this? I mean, for example, one of the things that if I drive down Northbourne and I see the cyclists, and I think, put your masks on because you're going to suffocate with the poison from the carbon dioxide. But that's part of the identity of an urban city that is not differentiated. Maybe it's actually less here than it is in Sydney or Melbourne or the big cities. But there's other things. We have this incredible bird song in this city. It's unbelievable. I've spoken to people who've come from major European cities, who've come over to do, as artists, to do residencies, or just to come over and stay with relatives and things like that. And one of the first things every single one of them has said has been, you can hear the birds here. And it's this wonderment, this incredible wonderment. And so I think sometimes, can you reconnect with the wonderment of the place that this is? What is it that takes your breath away? It might just be the changing colours of the sky, or the bird song, or it might be the architectural change, or even the architectural clashing of one building against another. But there will be something that will impact you. And that's going to lead you to understand something about why you have that reaction. What is it that makes me react in a particular way to this? And then how can I manifest that in what I make?
Kate, how do you respond to that? You're a transplant yourself. What's your thought about how you evolve that distinctive sense of place and that then translates into your practice, perhaps?
2 things for your practical. Talk it up. In every conversation I have with someone around the country or overseas, I talk about where I am and how much I love it. And look, that's after years and years of living in regional and remote Australia. I know that the power of citizens talking about why they love their place, why they love birdsong, why they think that it's incredible that I can walk to somewhere and go for a walk with kangaroos, that those conversations actually do impact on the perception of a place externally, but also internally. Secondly, doing that place identity, that place making, investing in a place, is a responsibility that has great public and private value, and is therefore a responsibility of both our public and private institutions. So talk it up, and also talk to your public and private investors about why they should be investing in making this place special, celebrating it, and something that we are proud of and can continue to be proud of.
I reckon there's nothing like living in the regions to get you really pumping with enthusiasm for the place that you live in.
Absolutely.
It's so important. Esther, let me turn back to you for the ideas that have bubbled up through all of this conversation. What are the calls to action, the ideas, the suggestions for the future that you want to make to us?
Look, I think it's been so clear in the way that Jenny and Kate have both just summarised. And as Jenny says, listen to those voices and express those voices. And as Kate says, talk it up. So I think it's incumbent on every one of us as we leave this evening to just really think, to take your role, your really active role seriously. What do you make? How do you listen to the voice of place, of your place? What will your voice be? And knowing, of course, reminding ourselves that public value, what we perceive as public value, is the responsibility of all of us. And so one challenge for us is to choose something that you've heard this evening and have that conversation again. Advocacy, as I often define it, advocacy is simply having a conversation. It's about choosing an issue that you want to make a constructive contribution about and telling a story that is yours, it comes from you and your experience. And it's not necessarily about wanting to twist someone's arm and by the end of the conversation have them thinking your way. But effective advocacy is when you've had that conversation with someone and you've conveyed what you wanted to in such a compelling way that that person is compelled to have that conversation again with someone else, whether they agree with you or not. So that conversation, those sets of conversations in your own words, as Jenny was just saying, project an expansion of your practice. Think about the maker and the advocate you want to be, and in that way, together, we will craft our future.
Thank you so much, Esther. Beautifully said. That brings us to the end of the formal part of our conversation. There's a number of people I want to thank. The Midnight Hotel, the ACT Government and Arts ACT and the City Renewal Authority. Design Canberra's Platinum Partners, Rolf Classic BMW, Home by Holly, the University of Canberra and the Suburban Land Agency, and our drink sponsors, always important, the drink sponsors, Prosecco DOC, the Lake George Winery and Capital Brewing. But most of all, I want to thank our wonderful guests tonight, Esther and I'm going to say your name wrongly, Esther, after practising it a number of times. Anatolitis, Esther Anatolitis.
Perfect, thank you.
Jenny Kamari Martinello and Kate Fielding, please thank them very warmly indeed. And stay and have a drink. Thank you everyone and good night.
Thank you.
Great.
Beautifully done.